The revolutions of 1848–49 in the German states, the opening phase of which was also called the March Revolution, were initially part of the revolutions of 1848 that broke out in many European countries. They were a series of loosely coordinated protests and rebellions in the states of the German Confederation, including the Austrian Empire. The revolutions, which stressed pan-Germanism, demonstrated popular discontent with the traditional, largely autocratic political structure of the 39 independent states of the Confederation that inherited the German territory of the former Holy Roman Empire. They demonstrated the popular desire for the Zollverein movement. The middle-class elements were committed to liberal principles, while the working class sought radical improvements to their working and living conditions. The middle class and working class components of the revolution split. The conservative aristocracy defeated it. Liberals were forced into exile to escape political persecution, where they became known as 48ers. Many immigrated to the United States, settling from Wisconsin to Texas. Events leading up to the revolutions. The groundwork of the 1848 uprising in Germany was laid long beforehand. The Hambacher Fest of 1832, for instance, reflected growing unrest in the face of heavy taxation and political censorship. The Hambacher Fest is noteworthy for the Republicans adopting the black-red-gold colors as a symbol of the Republican movement and of unity among the German-speaking people. Activism for liberal reform spread through many of the German states, each of which had distinct revolutions. They were also inspired by street demonstrations of workers and artisans in Paris, France, from February 22 through 24, 1848, which resulted in the abdication by King Louis-Philippe of France and his going into exile in Britain. In France, the Revolution of 1848 became known as the February Revolution. The revolution spread across Europe. They erupted in Austria and Germany, beginning with the large demonstrations on March 13, 1848, in Vienna. This resulted in the resignation of Prince von Metternich as chief minister to Emperor Ferdinand I of Austria, and his going into exile in Britain. Because of the date of the Vienna demonstrations, the revolutions in Germany are usually called the March Revolution. Fearing the fate of Louis-Philippe of France, some monarchs in Germany accepted some of the demands of the revolutionaries, at least temporarily. In the south and west, large popular assemblies and mass demonstrations took place. They demanded freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, written constitutions, arming of the people, and a parliament. Austria. In 1848, Austria was the predominant German state. It was considered the successor to the Holy Roman Empire, which had been dissolved by Napoleon in 1806, and was not resurrected by the Congress of Vienna in 1815. German-Austrian Chancellor Metternich had dominated Austrian politics from 1815 until 1848. On March 13, 1848, university students mounted a large street demonstration in Vienna, and it was covered by the press across the German-speaking states. Following the important, but relatively minor, demonstrations against Lola Montez in Bavaria on February 9, 1848, the first major revolt of 1848 in German lands occurred in Vienna on March 13, 1848. The demonstrating students in Vienna had been restive and were encouraged by a sermon of Anton Fuster, a liberal priest, on Sunday, March 12, 1848 in the University Chapel. The student demonstrators demanded a constitution and a constituent assembly elected by universal male suffrage. Emperor Ferdinand and his chief advisor Metternich directed troops to crush the demonstration. When demonstrators moved to the streets near the palace, the troops fired on the students, killing several. The new working class of Vienna joined the student demonstrations, developing an armed insurrection. The Diet of Lower Austria demanded Metternich's resignation, with no forces rallying to Metternich's defense. Ferdinand reluctantly complied and dismissed him. The former chancellor went into exile in London. Ferdinand appointed new, nominally liberal, ministers. The Austrian government drafted a constitution in late April 1848. The people rejected this, as the majority was denied the right to vote. The citizens of Vienna returned to the streets from May 26 through 27, 1848, erecting barricades to prepare for an army offense. Ferdinand and his family fled to Innsbruck, where they spent the next few months surrounded by the loyal peasantry of the Tyrol. Ferdinand issued two manifestos on May 16, 1848 and June 3, 1848, which gave concessions to the people. He converted the Imperial Diet into a constituent assembly to be elected by the people. Other concessions were less substantial, and generally addressed the reorganizing and unification of Germany. Ferdinand returned to Vienna from Innsbruck on August 12, 1848. Soon after his return, the working-class populace hit the streets again on August 21, 1848, to protest high unemployment and the government's decree to reduce wages. On August 23, 1848, Austrian troops opened fire on unarmed demonstrators and shot several. In late September 1848, Emperor Ferdinand, who was also King Ferdinand V of Hungary, decided to send Austrian and Croatian troops to Hungary to crush a democratic rebellion there. On September 29, 1848, the Austrian troops were defeated by the Hungarian revolutionary forces. On October 6 through 7, 1848, the citizens of Vienna had demonstrated against the emperor's actions against forces in Hungary. As a result, Emperor Ferdinand I fled Vienna on October 7, 1848, taking up residence in the fortress town of Olomouc in Moravia, in the Eastern Empire. On December 2, 1848, Ferdinand abdicated in favor of his nephew Franz Joseph. Baden. He had had a liberal constitution from 1811 until reaction resulted in aristocratic rulers revoking the constitution in 1825. In 1830, Leopold of Baden became Duke of the Duchy. His reign brought liberal reforms in constitutional, civil and criminal law, and in education. In 1832, Baden joined the customs union. After news broke of revolutionary victories in February 1848 in Paris, uprisings occurred throughout Europe, including Austria and the German states. Baden was the first state in Germany to have popular unrest. Despite the liberal reforms, Baden happened to be one of the most liberal states in Germany. After the news of the February days in Paris reached Baden, there were several unorganized instances of peasants burning the mansions of local aristocrats and threatening them. On February 27, 1848, in Mannheim, an assembly of people from Baden adopted a resolution demanding a Bill of Rights. Similar resolutions were adopted in Württemberg, Hesse-Darmstadt, Nassau, and other German states. The surprisingly strong popular support for these movements forced rulers to give in to many of the Marsforderungen almost without resistance. The March Revolution in Vienna was a catalyst to revolution throughout the German states. Popular demands were made for an elected representative government and for the unification of Germany. Fear on the part of the princes and rulers of the various German states caused them to concede in the demand for reform. They approved a pre-parliament, which was convened from March 31, 1848, until April 4, 1848, in St. Paul's Church in Frankfurt am Main, charged with the task of drafting a new constitution, to be called the Fundamental Rights and Demands of the German People. The majority of the delegates to the pre-parliament were constitutional monarchists. Baden sent two Democrats, Friedrich Karl Franz Hecker and Gustav von Struve, to the pre-parliament. In the minority and frustrated with the lack of progress, Hecker and Struve walked out in protest on April 2, 1848. The walkout and the continuing revolutionary upsurge in Germany spurred the pre-parliament to action. They passed a resolution calling for an all-German National Assembly to be formed. On April 8, 1848, a law allowing universal suffrage and an indirect voting system was agreed to by the Assembly. A new National Assembly was selected, and on May 18, 1848, 809 delegates were seated at St. Paul's Church in Frankfurt to convene the Frankfurt National Assembly. Karl Matthey, a right-centre journalist, was among those elected as deputy to the Frankfurt National Assembly. Disorder fomented by Republican agitators continued in Baden. Fearing greater riots, the Baden government began to increase the size of its army and to seek assistance from neighboring states. The Baden government sought to suppress the revolts by arresting Joseph Fickler, a journalist who was the leader of the Baden Democrats. Their arrests caused outrage and a rise in protests. A full-scale uprising broke out on April 12, 1848. The Bavarian government suppressed the revolutionary forces led by Friedrich Hecker with the aid of Prussian troops at Kanden on April 20, 1848, ending what became known as the Hecker Uprising. In May 1849, a resurgence of revolutionary activity occurred in Baden. As this was closely connected to the uprising in the German Palatinate, it is described below, in the section titled The Palatinate. The Palatinate. When the revolutionary upsurge revived in the spring of 1849, the uprisings started in Elberfeld in the Rhineland on May 6, 1849. However, the uprising soon spread to the state of Baden, when a riot broke out in Karlsruhe. The state of Baden and the Palatinate were separated only by the Rhine. The uprising in Baden and the Palatinate took place largely in the Rhine Valley, along the mutual border, and are considered aspects of the same movement. In May 1849, the Grand Duke was forced to leave Karlsruhe, Baden and seek help from Prussia. Provisional governments were declared in both the Palatinate and Baden. In Baden, conditions for the provisional government were ideal. The public and army were both strongly in support of constitutional change and democratic reform in the government. The army strongly supported the demands for a constitution. The state had amply supplied arsenals and a full exchequer. The Palatinate did not have the same conditions. The Palatinate traditionally contained more upper-class citizens than other areas of Germany, and they resisted the revolutionary changes. In the Palatinate, the army did not support the revolution, and it was not well supplied. When the insurrectionary government took over in the Palatinate, they did not find a fully organized state or a full exchequer. Arms in the Palatinate were limited to privately held muskets, rifles and sporting guns. The provisional government of the Palatinate sent agents to France and Belgium to purchase arms, but they were unsuccessful. France banned sales and export of arms to either Baden or the Palatinate. The provisional government government first appointed Joseph Martin Reichard, a lawyer, Democrat and deputy in the Frankfurt Assembly, as the head of the military department in the Palatinate. The first commander-in-chief of the military forces of the Palatinate was Daniel Fenner von Fennerberg, a former Austrian officer who commanded the National Guard in Vienna during the 1848 uprising. He was soon replaced by Felix Rakiliat, a former Polish staff general in the Polish insurgent army of 1830–31. Finally, Ludwik Mieroslavsky was given supreme command of the armed forces in the Palatinate, and Franz Sigel was given field command of the troops. Other noteworthy military officers serving the Provisional Government in the city of Kaiserslautern were Friedrich Strasser, Alexander Schimmelpfennig, Captain Rudolf von Menteufel, Albert Clement Herziklinski, Friedrich von Beust, Eugen Oswald Amend Goeck, Gustav von Struve, Otto Julius Bernhard von Korven Wierzbicki, Joseph Moll, Johann Gottfried Kinkel, Herr Mersey, Karl Emmermann, Franz Sigel, Major Nerlinger, Colonel Kurz, Friedrich Karl Franz Hecker and Hermann von Natzmer. Hermann von Natzmer was the former Prussian officer who had been in charge of the arsenal of Berlin, refusing to shoot insurgent forces who stormed the arsenal on June 14, 1848. Natzmer became a hero to insurgents across Germany. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for refusing orders to shoot, but in 1849, he escaped prison and fled to the Palatinate to join its insurgent forces. Gustav Adolf Techow, a former Prussian officer, also joined Palatinate forces, organizing the artillery and providing services in the ordnance shops was Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich Hanecker. He was a member of the Communist League and one of the founders of the Cologne Workers' Association in 1848, editor of the Neue Kölnische Zeitung and a Rhenish District Committee of Democrats. Democrats of the Palatinate and across Germany considered the Baden Palatinate insurrection to be part of the wider all-German struggle for constitutional rights. Franz Sigel, a second lieutenant in the Baden army, a Democrat and a supporter of the Provisional Government, developed a plan to protect the reform movement in Karlsruhe and the Palatinate. He recommended using a corps of the Baden army to advance on the town of Hohenzollern and declare the Hohenzollern Republic, then to march on Stuttgart. After inciting Stuttgart and the surrounding state of Württemberg, the military corps would march to Nuremberg and set up camp in the state of Franconia. Sigel failed to account for dealing with the separate town of Frankfurt, the home of the Frankfurt Assembly, in order to establish an all-German character to the military campaign for the German constitution. Despite Sigel's plan, the new insurgent government did not go on the offensive. The uprising in Karlsruhe and the state of Baden was eventually suppressed by the Bavarian army. Lorenz Peter Brentano, a lawyer and Democrat from Baden, headed its government, wielding absolute power. He appointed Karl Eichfeld as war minister. Later, Eichfeld was replaced as war minister by Rudolf Mayhofer. Florian Maudz was appointed as Minister of the Interior. Other members of the Provisional Government included Joseph Fickler, a journalist and a Democrat from Baden. Leaders of the constitutional forces in Baden included Karl Blind, a journalist and a Democrat in Baden, and Gustav von Struve, another journalist and Democrat from Baden. John Philip Becker was placed in charge of the People's Militia. Ludwik Mieroslavsky, a Polish-born national who had taken part in the military operations during the Polish Uprising of 1830–31, was placed in charge of the military operation on the Palatinate side of the Rhine River. Brentano ordered the day-to-day affairs of the uprising in Baden, and Mieroslavsky directed a military command on the Palatinate side. They did not coordinate well. For example, Mieroslavsky decided to abolish the long-standing toll on the Mannheim-Ludwigshafen bridge over the Rhine River. It was not collected on the Palatinate side, but Brentano's government collected it on the Baden side. Due to the continued lack of coordination, Mieroslavsky lost battles in Waghäusel and Ubstadt in Baden. He and his troops were forced to retreat across the mountains of southern Baden, where they fought a last battle against the Prussians in the town of Murg, on the frontier between Baden and Switzerland. Mieroslavsky and the other survivors of the battle escaped across the frontier to Switzerland, and the commander went into exile in Paris. Friedrich Engels took part in the uprising in Baden and the Palatinate. On May 10, 1848, he and Karl Marx traveled from Cologne, Germany, to observe the events of the region. From June 1, 1848, Engels and Marx became editors of the Neue Rheinische Zeitung. Less than a year later, on May 19, 1849, the Prussian authorities closed down the newspaper because of its support for constitutional reforms. In late 1848, Marx and Engels intended to meet with Karl Ludwig Johann Dester, then serving as a member of the Provisional Government in Baden and the Palatinate. He was a physician, Democrat and socialist who had been a member of the Cologne Community chapter of the Communist League. Dester had been elected as a deputy to the Prussian National Assembly in 1848. Dester had been elected to the Central Committee of the German Democrats, together with Reichenbach and Hexamer, at the Second Democratic Congress held in Berlin from October 26 through October 30, 1848. Because of his commitments to the Provisional Government, Dester was unable to attend an important meeting in Paris on behalf of the German Central Committee. He wanted to provide Marx with the mandate to attend the meeting in his place. Marx and Engels met with Dester in the town of Kaiserslautern. Marx obtained the mandate and headed off to Paris. Engels remained in the Palatinate, where in 1849 he joined citizens at the barricades of Elberfeld in the Rhineland, preparing to fight the Prussian troops expected to arrive against the uprising. On his way to Elberfeld, Engels took 2 cases of rifle cartridges which had been gathered by the workers of Zollverein, Germany. When those workers had stormed the arsenal at Grafrath, Germany, the Prussian troops arrived and crushed the uprising in August 1849. Engels and some others escaped to Kaiserslautern. While in Kaiserslautern on June 13, 1849, Engels joined an 800-member group of workers being formed as a military corps by August Willich, a former Prussian military officer. He was also a member of the Communist League and supported revolutionary change in Germany. The newly formed Willich Corps combined with other revolutionary groups to form an army of about 30,000 strong. It fought to resist the highly trained Prussian troops. Engels fought with the Willich Corps for their entire campaign in the Palatinate. The Prussians defeated this revolutionary army, and the survivors of Willich's corps crossed over the frontier into the safety of Switzerland. Engels did not reach Switzerland until July 25, 1849. He sent word of his survival to Marx and friends and comrades in London, England. A refugee in Switzerland, Engels began to write about his experiences during the revolution. He published the article, "The Campaign for the German Imperial Constitution." Due to the Prussian army's ease in crushing the uprising, many South German states came to believe that Prussia, not Austria, was going to be the new power in the region. The suppression of the uprising in Baden and the Palatinate was the end of the German revolutionary uprisings that had begun in the spring of 1848. Prussia. In March 1848, crowds of people gathered in Berlin to present their demands in an address to the king. King Frederick William IV, taken by surprise, yielded verbally to all the demonstrators' demands, including parliamentary elections, a constitution, and freedom of the press. He promised that Prussia was to be merged forthwith into Germany. On March 13, the army charged people returning from a meeting in the Tiergarten. They left one person dead and many injured. On March 18, a large demonstration occurred, when 2 shots were fired. The people feared that some of the 20,000 soldiers would be used against them. They erected barricades, fighting started, and a battle took place until troops were ordered 13 hours later to retreat, leaving hundreds dead. Afterwards, Frederick William attempted to reassure the public that he would proceed with reorganizing his government. The king also approved arming the citizens. On March 21, he proceeded through the streets of Berlin to attend a mass funeral at the Friedrichshain Cemetery for the civil victims of the uprising. He and his ministers and generals wore the revolutionary tricolor of black, red, and gold. After Polish prisoners were liberated, they paraded through the city, acclaimed by the people. They had been jailed as suspects in planning a rebellion in formerly Polish territories now ruled by Prussia. The 254 persons killed during the riots were laid out on catafalques on the Gendarmenmarkt. Some 40,000 people accompanied them to the burial place at Friedrichshain. A constituent National Assembly was elected and gathered in St. Paul's Church in Frankfurt am Main on May 18, 1848. Officially called the All-German National Assembly, it was composed of deputies democratically elected from various German states in late April and early May 1848. The deputies consisted of 122 government officials, 95 judges, 81 lawyers, 103 teachers, 17 manufacturers and wholesale dealers, 15 physicians, and 40 landowners. A majority of the assembly were liberals. It became known as the Professors' Parliament, as many of its members were academics in addition to their other responsibilities. The one working-class member was Polish and, like colleagues from the Tyrol, not taken seriously. Starting on May 18, 1848, the Frankfurt Assembly worked to find ways to unite the various German states and to write a constitution. The Assembly was unable to pass resolutions and dissolved into endless debate. On May 22, 1848, another elected assembly sat for the first time in Berlin. They were elected under the law of April 8, 1848, which allowed for universal suffrage and a two-stage voting system. Most of the deputies elected to the Berlin Assembly, called the Prussian National Assembly, were members of the burghers' liberal bureaucracy. They set about the task of writing a constitution by agreement with the Crown. King Frederick William IV of Prussia unilaterally imposed a monarchist constitution to undercut the democratic forces. This constitution took effect on December 5, 1848. On December 5, 1848, the Berlin Assembly was dissolved and replaced with the bicameral legislature allowed under the monarchist constitution. This legislature was composed of a Herrenhaus and a Landtag. Otto von Bismarck was elected to the first Landtag elected under the new monarchical constitution. Saxony. In Dresden, the capital of the Kingdom of Saxony, the people took to the streets asking King Frederick Augustus II of Saxony to engage in electoral reform, social justice and for a constitution. The famous German composer, Richard Wagner, passionately engaged himself in the revolution in Dresden, supporting the democratic Republican movement. Later during the May Uprising in Dresden from May 3 to 9, 1849, he supported the Provisional Government. Others participating in the uprising were the Russian revolutionary Michael Bakunin and the German working-class leader Stephen Born. In all, about 2,500 combatants manned the barricades during the May uprising. On May 9, 1849, together with the leaders of the uprising, Wagner left Dresden for Switzerland to avoid arrest. He spent a number of years in exile abroad, in Switzerland, Italy, and Paris. Finally, the government lifted its ban against him and he returned to Germany. Since the revolutionary events of 1830, Saxony had been ruled as a constitutional monarchy with a two-chamber legislature and an accountable ministry. This constitution continued to serve as the basis of the Saxon government until 1918. The Revolution of 1848 brought more popular reforms in the government of Saxony. In 1849, many Saxon residents emigrated to the United States, including Michael Macamail. They landed in Galveston, Texas and created what became the German Texan community. In mid-century, some lived in cities, but many developed substantial farms to the west in Texas.